There's a specific moment when you realize the game you thought you were playing doesn't actually exist. You've been operating with one set of assumptions while others have been operating with entirely different ones. You believed in fairness, mutual respect, and shared standards. They believed in advantage, positioning, and strategic exploitation. This realization is uncomfortable. It contradicts the worldview you've been building since childhood. You were taught that good behavior produces good outcomes, that integrity protects you, that playing by the rules ensures others will too. But watch what actually happens in professional environments, social dynamics, and competitive situations. The individuals who advance aren't always the most ethical. They're the most strategic. They understand something fundamental about human interaction that well-meaning people often miss. The rules aren't universal. They're optional. And those who recognize this first gain disproportionate advantage. Niccolò Machiavelli didn't invent manipulation. He observed it systematically and documented what he saw. His writings disturb people not because they're evil, but because they're accurate. He described human behavior without the comfortable filter of how we wish people would behave. When someone operates without your constraints, they're not necessarily immoral. They've simply recognized that morality is internally held, not universally enforced. They've accepted that the world doesn't punish rule-breaking consistently, and they've adjusted their strategy accordingly. This creates an asymmetry. You're limiting your moves based on principles they don't share. You're telegraphing your actions through predictable patterns. You're handicapping yourself with transparency while they operate with strategic opacity. The uncomfortable truth is this: understanding manipulative tactics doesn't make you manipulative. It makes you aware. And awareness is the difference between being a participant and being a piece on someone else's board. This isn't about abandoning your values. It's about recognizing that values without awareness create vulnerability. That integrity without strategic thinking makes you an easy target. That being good doesn't protect you if you can't recognize when others aren't. In the next sections, we'll examine 10 psychological principles that govern human interaction when the comfortable illusions are removed. These aren't motivational concepts. They're operational frameworks, tools for navigating environments where not everyone shares your rulebook. Type this in the comments to confirm your engagement. I operate with awareness. Let's begin. Here's what makes someone an attractive target. Consistency, not competence, not weakness. Consistency. When your responses are predictable, you've provided a user manual. Others can test variables and anticipate outcomes. They know what provokes you, what placates you, what makes you withdraw. Your consistency, which you consider reliability, becomes a tool for those who observe strategically. Machiavelli watched this pattern repeatedly in Renaissance politics. The advisors who fell fastest weren't the incompetent ones. They were the predictable ones. Once their decision-making patterns were understood, they could be maneuvered. Once their emotional triggers were mapped, they could be controlled. Your professional and personal life operates identically. Think about the last time someone exploited you. What made it possible? Probably not a single weakness. More likely, they understood your patterns. They knew you'd give second chances. They knew you'd avoid confrontation. They knew you'd prioritize harmony over position. This is why strategically inconsistent behavior creates protection. Not random behavior, but calculated variation. Sometimes you respond immediately. Sometimes you don't respond at all. Sometimes you're accommodating. Sometimes you're immovable. The pattern isn't absent, but it's not visible to casual observation. This unpredictability creates mental overhead for anyone trying to manipulate you. They can't run simple calculations because the formula keeps changing. They can't rely on past responses to predict future ones. They have to invest more energy into each interaction, which makes you expensive to manipulate. Most people resist this approach because it feels inconsistent with their identity. I'm someone who always is how many self-descriptions begin. But completing that sentence creates vulnerability. When you always respond a certain way, you've announced your limitations. Strategic unpredictability doesn't mean abandoning principles. It means not advertising them. Your values remain stable internally, but your external responses vary based on context, relationship, and strategic value. The person who always confronts becomes easy to provoke. The person who always avoids becomes easy to intimidate. The person who always explains becomes easy to question. But the person who sometimes does each, based on criteria others can't easily determine, that person is difficult to play. Consistency is comfortable, it's also transparent. And transparency, when others don't reciprocate it, is a strategic disadvantage you're choosing to accept. Stop providing the manual. Make them guess. Let uncertainty be your shield. Strength, when obvious, provokes defensive responses. Capability, when advertised, triggers competitive reactions. Competence, when displayed fully, encourages others to protect their positions and guard their information. But perceived limitation, that creates openness. When people believe they hold advantages over you, their behavior changes. They become less careful, more revealing. They explain things they'd normally guard. They expose strategies they'd typically conceal. Machiavelli observed that the appearance of weakness could be more strategically valuable than the demonstration of strength. Not actual weakness, but the perception of it. This is different from deception. It's selective revelation. Consider negotiations. The person who demonstrates complete understanding of every variable often gets the worst outcome. Why? Because the other party becomes defensive, protective, strategic. They recognize they're dealing with someone sophisticated, so they reveal nothing unnecessary. But when you ask seemingly naive questions, when you appear to miss certain implications, when you let others believe they're guiding you, information flows more freely. They over-explain. They reveal priorities through what they emphasize. They expose their actual concerns through what they reassure you about. This doesn't mean pretending to be incompetent. It means choosing which capabilities to display and which to keep concealed. It means understanding that full transparency about your understanding often works against your interests. In professional settings, the person who appears to need guidance often receives more information than the person who appears fully informed. In social dynamics, the person who seems unaware of certain undercurrents often sees more than those who announce their perception. The technique requires discipline. Your ego wants to demonstrate knowledge. Your insecurity wants to prove competence. Your pride wants others to recognize your understanding. But these desires often work against strategic positioning. Watch what happens when you restrain the urge to correct, clarify, or demonstrate awareness. People continue their patterns assuming you haven't noticed. They repeat tactics assuming you didn't catch them the first time. They escalate believing you lack the perception to recognize what's happening. This continuation provides data. Patterns become visible, intentions become clear, and you've gathered information without alerting them that you're observing strategically. Apparent disadvantage is not actual weakness. It's strategic ambiguity that allows others to underestimate you while you gather information they wouldn't provide if they knew you were tracking carefully. Most people try to establish their identity immediately in interactions. They announce their position, display their knowledge, demonstrate their values. This establishes them clearly, which feels powerful, but is often strategically limiting. Machiavelli understood that reflecting others reveals more about them than asserting yourself reveals about you. When you mirror someone's communication style, energy level, and approach, they become comfortable. That comfort leads to revelation. This isn't manipulation through false pretense. It's creating an environment where people naturally expose their authentic patterns. When someone feels they're interacting with a similar person, their guard lowers. They assume shared understanding. They skip explanations they'd normally provide. They reveal assumptions they'd typically verify first. The technique is straightforward. Match their pace, tone, and communication style. If they're direct, be direct. If they're reflective, be reflective. If they use specific terminology, adopt it. This creates psychological rapport that facilitates information flow. What you gain is visibility into their decision-making frameworks. How do they structure arguments? What evidence do they value? What triggers defensiveness? What creates openness? These patterns become apparent when you're not imposing your own communication style on the interaction. Most people miss this because they're focused on being understood rather than understanding. They want to make their point rather than discovering the landscape. They prioritize expression over reconnaissance. But in strategic environments, understanding the terrain before advancing is essential. Mirroring provides that understanding without announcing that you're gathering it. This is particularly valuable when dealing with manipulative individuals. They often have well-practiced presentations designed to control interactions. When you mirror rather than react, you see the presentation without being influenced by it. You can observe the technique while appearing engaged with the content. The discipline required is simple but difficult. Suppress the urge to interject your perspective until you've fully extracted theirs. Don't correct, don't challenge, don't redirect. Just reflect and absorb. What emerges is a complete picture of how they operate, their priorities, their tactics, their assumptions, and they've provided all of it voluntarily because your mirroring made them comfortable enough to reveal themselves. Information advantage doesn't come from asserting what you know. It comes from extracting what they know. There's significant strategic value in appearing to miss certain implications, not actual ignorance but performed unawareness. When people believe you haven't caught their tactic, their contradiction, or their agenda, they continue using it. This continuation provides pattern data that single observations wouldn't reveal. Machiavelli recognized that correction often stops behavior before it becomes fully visible. When you immediately call out a manipulative move, the person adjusts. They modify their approach. You've seen one tactic, but not the full strategy. But when you allow the tactic to appear successful, when you seem oblivious to what they're attempting, they continue, they escalate. They become more obvious because they believe it's working. The full pattern emerges. This requires emotional discipline. Your ego wants to demonstrate that you caught them. Your pride wants them to know you're not fooled. Your desire for confrontation wants immediate correction. But these impulses serve your feelings, not your strategy. Strategic silence allows comprehensive pattern recognition. You see not just what they tried once, but what they do consistently. Not just their initial move, but their full approach. Not just their surface tactic, but their underlying methodology. This also applies to information others share. Sometimes people reveal things indirectly, testing whether you're paying attention. If you immediately acknowledge and discuss it, they become cautious about future revelations. But if you appear to barely notice, they continue sharing, assuming you're not tracking carefully. The technique transforms you from reactive to observational. Instead of responding to each move, you're cataloging patterns. Instead of correcting each error, you're building a complete picture. Instead of winning individual exchanges, you're understanding the entire system. This doesn't mean permanent silence. It means strategic timing. You don't reveal your awareness until revelation serves your interests. You don't correct until correction advances your position. You don't confront until confrontation produces your desired outcome. In the meantime, selective ignorance provides protection through information asymmetry. They believe you're unaware. You know you're tracking. They continue revealing. You continue cataloging. When you eventually act, you're acting from comprehensive understanding, not reactive impulse. Appearing to miss what you're actually recording is one of the most powerful information-gathering techniques available. Every emotional reaction you display becomes data for strategic observers. Show anger. They know what triggers you. Show hurt. They know what weapons work. Show guilt. They know which pressures produce compliance. Your emotional transparency creates a manual for your manipulation. Machiavelli watched emotional reactions destroy otherwise capable leaders, not because emotions themselves were problematic, but because visible emotions provided leverage to opponents. Once they understood what moved you emotionally, they could orchestrate those movements. Your interactions operate identically. People are constantly testing what produces emotional responses, not necessarily consciously, but they're noting what generates reaction. And once they've identified your emotional triggers, those triggers become tools. The person who gets angry when disrespected will be disrespected strategically when anger serves someone's purpose. The person who feels guilty when disappointing others will be pressured through guilt when compliance is desired. The person who needs approval will be manipulated through its withdrawal. This doesn't mean suppressing genuine emotion in genuine relationships. It means being selective about who sees your full emotional range. Most people haven't earned that access. Most situations don't warrant it. Strategic emotional control means your internal experience can be rich and varied, while your external presentation remains calibrated. You feel everything, but you display selectively based on context and relationship. This creates a problem for manipulators. They can't reliably trigger desired emotional states. They attempt guilt. You remain unbothered. They attempt anger. You stay calm. They attempt insecurity. You show none. Their tactics fail not because you don't have emotions, but because you don't grant them access to those emotions. The technique isn't emotional suppression. It's strategic presentation. You're choosing which emotions to display and when to display them based on what serves your interests, not based on automatic reactions to stimuli they control. This also changes how others treat you. People are generally cautious around those they can't emotionally manipulate. They can't use anger to intimidate. They can't use guilt to coerce. They can't use approval withdrawal to control. Without these tools, they have to engage more directly and honestly, which often improves interaction quality. Emotional availability should be a privilege earned through demonstrated trustworthiness, not a default state granted to everyone. Guard your emotional landscape. Make it private territory that only selected people access. When your emotions aren't available for manipulation, you're immediately more difficult to control. Language creates obligation. The moment you speak, you've created expectations. You've provided content that can be analyzed, challenged, or used. You've given others material to work with. Silence provides none of this. Machiavelli observed that rulers who explained themselves constantly appeared weak, regardless of the quality of their explanations. The act of explaining positioned them as accountable to those receiving explanations. But rulers who acted without explanation appeared authoritative, regardless of whether their actions were actually justified. Your daily interactions follow this pattern. When someone questions your decision and you provide detailed justification, what have you communicated? That their questions deserve your explanations, that you're accountable to their curiosity, that your choices require their approval. But when you simply don't explain, you've communicated something entirely different, that your decisions are yours to make, not theirs to approve. This applies broadly. Someone criticizes your approach. Detailed defense makes you appear defensive. Silence makes them appear petty. Someone questions your boundaries. Lengthy justification weakens the boundary. Silence maintains it. Someone demands to know your reasoning. Exhaustive explanation positions you below them. No response maintains equal footing. The discomfort you feel with silence is social conditioning. You've been taught that not responding is rude, that silence equals agreement, that withholding explanation means you can't defend your position. None of this is actually true. It's simply what keeps people compliant with social pressure. Strategic silence is different from avoidance. Avoidance is fear-based withdrawal. Strategic silence is power-based discretion. You're capable of responding but choosing not to, because response doesn't serve your interests. This also reveals important information about others. People who need your explanations to feel secure are showing you their relationship to authority. People who become hostile when you don't explain are showing you their relationship to control. People who accept your silence are showing you they respect boundaries. Your words are resources. Spend them where they create value. Everywhere else, silence is not just adequate, it's superior. When you stop feeling obligated to fill every silence with explanation, you reclaim significant power. Let others sit with unanswered questions. Let them be uncomfortable with your discretion. That discomfort is their problem, not yours to solve. Presence, when constant, loses impact. Availability when unlimited loses value. Engagement when automatic loses leverage. These aren't opinions. They're economics applied to human interaction. Machiavelli understood that strategic absence often accomplishes what constant presence cannot. When you're always available, always engaged, always participating, you've removed one of your most powerful tools, the ability to withdraw. Withdrawal disrupts established patterns. It creates uncertainty. It forces others to reconsider assumptions they've made about your availability, your investment, and your alternatives. Most importantly, it breaks the rhythm of interactions that weren't serving you. This is different from disappearing permanently or unpredictably. It's tactical disengagement that serves specific purposes. You're not abandoning situations randomly. You're removing yourself strategically when your presence is being taken for granted or used against your interests. In professional contexts, the person who's always available for meetings, always responsive to requests, always accommodating to schedule changes, establishes a pattern. Others begin assuming this availability. They stop valuing it because it's unlimited. They start expecting it as baseline rather than appreciating it as generosity. But when that person becomes selectively available, when responses become less immediate, when accommodation becomes occasional rather than automatic, the entire dynamic shifts. Others start competing for access. They begin valuing interaction that previously they took for granted. The same pattern exists in personal relationships. Constant availability often leads to reduced appreciation. Strategic withdrawal, not permanent or punitive but measured and occasional, reminds others that your presence is voluntary, not obligatory. This technique also provides valuable information. Watch who respects your withdrawal and who becomes hostile about it. Those who respect it are recognizing your autonomy. Those who become hostile are revealing they felt entitled to unlimited access. This distinction is strategically useful. The discipline required is resisting the urge to explain your withdrawal. When you strategically disengage, don't announce it, don't justify it, don't apologize for it. Just be less available. Let others interpret it however they will. Withdrawal works because it disrupts expectations without direct confrontation. You haven't argued, you haven't accused, you haven't fought. You've simply removed yourself from a dynamic that wasn't serving you. Your presence is valuable. Stop making it universally available. Scarcity creates value. Apply this to your availability and watch how interactions transform. Most people exhaust themselves trying to prove things. Their competence, their intentions, their worth. They believe that sufficient evidence will change others' minds, earn respect, or resolve conflicts. This belief drives enormous energy expenditure that rarely produces desired outcomes. Machiavelli observed something different. Position matters more than proof. When you hold a strong position, others adjust to you regardless of what you've proven. When your position is weak, no amount of evidence changes the fundamental dynamic. Position is about structural advantage, not demonstrated merit. It's about having options, alternatives, and the ability to walk away. It's about being less dependent on any particular outcome than others are. Consider negotiations. The person who needs the deal will make concessions regardless of having the better argument. The person with alternatives maintains their terms regardless of having the weaker case. Position, not proof, determines outcomes. This applies everywhere. In professional environments, the employee with other job offers doesn't need to prove their value extensively. The employee without alternatives must constantly demonstrate worth regardless of their actual contributions. Position creates the difference, not proof. In social dynamics, the person who's comfortable alone doesn't need to prove their enjoyable company. The person desperate for connection must constantly demonstrate value regardless of their actual qualities. Position determines treatment, not evidence. The mistake people make is investing energy in proving when they should be investing in positioning. Rather than gathering more evidence of your capabilities, develop more alternatives. Rather than crafting better arguments, improve your ability to walk away. Rather than documenting your contributions more thoroughly, reduce your dependence on others' recognition. Positioning means building structural advantages, multiple options, financial independence, alternative relationships, diverse skills, emotional self-sufficiency. These advantages matter more than any amount of proving. When you have strong position, people adjust to you without requiring extensive proof. When your position is weak, proof rarely compensates for that weakness. This is why Machiavelli emphasized practical power over theoretical justice. He wasn't arguing against fairness. He was observing that position enforces outcomes more reliably than arguments about fairness do. Stop trying to prove your way into power. Build position instead. Position gives you power that proving never will. Intervention bias drives people to manage situations that would resolve themselves. They explain when silence would be more powerful. They defend when accusers would self-discredit. They engage when absence would be more effective. This constant intervention prevents natural consequences from operating. Machiavelli understood that strategic inaction often produces better outcomes than action, not paralysis from uncertainty, but disciplined restraint when intervention isn't necessary, allowing situations to unfold naturally, rather than managing every variable. This is particularly powerful when dealing with manipulative people. They often make moves that seem dangerous in the moment, but are actually unsustainable over time. When you intervene immediately, you prevent those natural consequences from manifesting. The person learns nothing. The pattern continues. But when you allow natural consequences to occur, when you don't rescue them from their own tactics, when you let their approach play out fully, often the situation resolves itself more effectively than your intervention ever could. Someone spreads false information about you. Your instinct is immediate correction, extensive defense, comprehensive rebuttal. But what happens if you do nothing? Often the information conflicts with people's direct experience of you. Often the person spreading it appears obsessive. Often the truth emerges naturally through time and observation, and you spent zero energy. Someone uses manipulative tactics in professional settings. Your instinct is to call it out immediately, to expose the manipulation, to defend yourself. But what happens if you simply let it run its course? Often the tactics become obvious to others. Often the person overreaches. Often they undermine themselves without your intervention. The discipline required is tolerance for short-term discomfort. Natural consequences take time. Immediate intervention feels more powerful because it provides instant action. But that instant action often prevents better long-term resolution. This doesn't mean never acting. It means distinguishing between situations requiring immediate response and situations that will resolve better through natural progression. Many battles are won by simply not fighting them. Many problems solve themselves when you stop interfering with their natural resolution. Many manipulators defeat themselves when you stop preventing that defeat. Strategic inaction isn't weakness. Often it's the strongest move available. The ultimate protection isn't eliminating manipulation attempts. It's making those attempts so costly that they naturally decrease. When manipulating you requires more energy than the potential return justifies, most people stop trying. Machiavelli understood that power isn't about winning every conflict. It's about making conflict with you unattractive, about becoming someone who's more valuable as an ally than as a target, about creating conditions where others naturally choose cooperation over confrontation because the alternatives are too expensive. This happens through accumulated patterns. Each time someone attempts manipulation and receives no emotional reaction, that's data. Each time they provoke and get no response, that's feedback. Each time they push and you remain unmoved, they're learning that their tactics don't work on you. This learning doesn't happen through single instances. It accumulates through consistent patterns. The person who tries to trigger guilt and receives indifference once might try again. But after multiple attempts with the same result, they usually redirect energy elsewhere. The key is consistency without explanation. You don't need to announce that you're not responding to their tactics. You just consistently don't respond. Your behavior communicates what words couldn't, that you're not available for that dynamic. This works because most manipulation is opportunistic, not deeply personal. People generally use tactics that work with minimal effort. When those tactics stop working, they move to easier targets. Not because they respect you particularly, but because effort-to-return ratio has shifted unfavorably. Becoming expensive to manipulate means emotional reactions aren't freely available, time and attention must be earned, explanations aren't provided on demand, patterns aren't predictable. Withdrawal is always an option. Your position doesn't depend on any single relationship. Each of these creates cost. Emotional manipulation requires emotional access. Time manipulation requires your availability. Guilt manipulation requires your explanatory impulse. Pattern exploitation requires your predictability. Pressure manipulation requires your dependence. When these elements aren't freely available, manipulation becomes expensive. It requires more energy, more time, more strategy than most people are willing to invest for uncertain returns. You don't need to fight everyone. You don't need to confront every manipulation. You don't need to expose every tactic. You just need to make engaging those tactics unrewarding. Make yourself expensive to manipulate, and most manipulation attempts will naturally redirect elsewhere. This isn't about isolation. It's about creating conditions where genuine interaction is easy and manipulative interaction is costly. Quality relationships flourish under these conditions. Exploitative ones naturally dissolve. Understanding manipulative dynamics doesn't require becoming manipulative. It requires recognizing that operating with one set of assumptions while others operate with different ones creates systematic disadvantage. The principles we've examined aren't about matching others' tactics. They're about removing your vulnerabilities to those tactics, about becoming someone who's difficult to manipulate not through constant vigilance, but through structural advantages that make manipulation ineffective. You don't need to play dirty. You need to stop assuming others share your rulebook. You don't need to abandon your values. You need to stop advertising them to people who might exploit them. You don't need to become cynical. You need to become observant. Machiavelli disturbs people because he described behavior without moral filtering. He showed what actually happens when the comfortable narratives are removed. This isn't about becoming what he described. It's about recognizing what he described so you can navigate it effectively. The world contains people with varying ethical frameworks. Some share yours, some don't. Pretending everyone shares your values doesn't protect you. It just makes you predictable to those who recognize you're operating with constraints they don't share. Strategic awareness means understanding patterns that govern human behavior, recognizing manipulation attempts as they occur, knowing which interactions serve your interests, choosing responses based on strategy, not automatic reaction, building positions that make you difficult to manipulate, becoming expensive enough to manipulate that attempts naturally decrease. These aren't manipulative tactics, they're protective frameworks. They allow you to maintain your values while recognizing when others don't share them. The goal isn't controlling others, it's preventing others from controlling you. Not dominating interactions, but refusing to be dominated by them. Not winning every exchange, but ensuring you're not systematically disadvantaged. Type this commitment in the comments: I protect my position. If this framework provided value, engage with this content and share it. Follow for more strategic psychology that removes comfortable illusions and provides operational clarity. You don't need to play dirty. You need to stop being easy to play. There's significant difference between those two approaches. Stay aware. Stay strategic. Stop being the obvious move.